So there's good news and bad news about backgrounding businesses. The good news is there's a ton of information out there. The bad news is there's a ton of information out there, right? You have to check everything out. And as my former colleague Bob Brewer once told me, trust but verify. Trust everything but verify it. So when my NPR colleagues Robert Benincasa and Joel Rose and I decided last month to look into companies getting government contracts to produce the personal protection equipment, the PPEs, we had to figure out which ones in this massive federal government database of companies to look at. And you guys probably know this, but it's the Federal Procurement Data System, the FPDS.gov. You can go to and find it. And we looked at the COVID-19 reports, right? So we narrowed it to those that got more than $1 million in contracts, and we created a spreadsheet to track it all. We included the company name, the owner, the contract amount, the number of contracts they got, whether there were lawsuits, campaign contributions, and those things that would give us more detail about the company or the people who run and own it. So the first slide, staying organized is key when you're dealing with lots of information. I can't see the slide, but maybe you guys can. Staying organized is key when you're dealing with lots of information. I thought the best thing was to focus on little known companies or LLCs, the limited liability companies. You want to start with the basic company information, right? The address, its history, such as when it was created. I always start my research with a simple Google search or Google Advanced search to see if anything has been written about the company or the people. I call it secondary sourcing. And don't forget to check out the company website, right? I mean, we look at all these websites and we know sometimes, the people on there are bogus. Some of the information on there might not be exactly right, but it could have lots of good information, such as location, a brief synopsis of what the company does or is alleged to have done, executives and board members. And I also have access to LexisNexis, as I'm sure most of you do, which will give me those details and more. But that costs. So if you don't have it, a Google search can give you similar information. I also search Facebook and LinkedIn and other social media to see if the companies have an account. You can do a Twitter advanced search to see if people are talking about the company. And remember also to check out trade publications. One of the businesses I looked into was Secure Our Schools, which is an LLC, which provides security consulting for schools and had never delivered PPE. So I wondered, how did they get a $2.8 million contract that was not competitively bid? So I Googled the company, of course, right, and found the name of the owner. I ran him through LinkedIn, and I found that he is a retired federal law enforcement agent who spent nearly 3 decades with ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I covered the ATF when I was at the Washington Post, and I still have sources in the agency. So I called one of them I knew who would know about this guy and possibly his company. I asked about his history with the agency, his reputation, what government connections he had that might have helped him get this contract to produce PPE and things like that. Backgrounding a business is not just checking out records. It's finding people who know the company or the person you're looking for. So I also ran the business through ZoomInfo to get company contacts, number of employees, and revenue. That site also listed an address, a city, a state, and a phone number. The other thing I found is that watchdog groups also can be good resources, and industry associations. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, so I was having a little trouble with the slideshow here.
Oh, that's okay.
So next slide is the backgrounding businesses with fine watchdog groups.
Right, watchdog groups can also be good resources, and industry associations. Always ask if they know of complaints against a company or if they can point you to others who could help you understand the company and its players, and if there are subsidiaries or foundations. Another company I examined was a Texas-based distributor that got 2 contracts worth millions of dollars to deliver face shields. I first went to the company website to learn about it and its mission, and it was all so very generic, right? It was an independent company that distributes medical products to the government. They have a passion for patients, and they're an industry leader, blah, 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 right? Tells me nothing. So then I checked Dun & Bradstreet records, which gives you a financial overview of the company, along with a business address, phone number, the type of organization, such as whether it's minority-owned, women-owned, small business. And I looked at the number of employees. There was 1 listed, and last year's annual sales. So then I did a Nexus search to find the owner's name. Then, of course, I ran his name through bankruptcy records and found that he had filed for bankruptcy in 1994. Then I found a lien in 2003 and a $3,500 state tax lien last year in another state, Oklahoma. I also found that his wife's name is Nicole, who's a registered nurse, which may have helped his mom and pop operation get the contracts that totaled up to, wait for it, $20 million. And not bad for a company whose financials showed that he had a $341,000 revenue last year. I want that. We're in the wrong business. I just want you guys to know that we're clearly in the wrong business. So always check local and federal court records when you're backgrounding a company. Civil complaints, criminal, bankruptcy, and tax records, right? Check all of those. Pacer.gov has federal court records. It costs, but it's so worth it. Or you can access lawsuits via Law 360. It's a subscription-based legal news service. You can get a free 30-day trial subscription without having to fork over a credit card. Like some make you for a trial, make you turn over a credit card. You don't have to do that for this. And that's law360.com. So besides Dun & Bradstreet for a financial overview of a public or private company, you may want to check sites like Hoovers.com, and then the Dun & Bradstreet, which is DNB.com, and Hoovers is Hoovers.com. For public companies, check out Google Finance or Yahoo Finance and SEC filings. An SEC filing, for those of you who may or may not know, is a financial statement or other formal record that public companies are required to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Another good site to check out public companies is sec.gov/EDGAR. EDGAR is a searchable database of public companies that lists all types of reports, where a company was incorporated, business addresses, and I will say that database can be a little boring to search unless you're really into financial reporting. I used it though for a story I did on companies that got the Paycheck Protection Program money that a few months ago the government, the Small Business Administration handed out, and I guess is still handing out. And you know, the purpose was to help small businesses meet their payroll and other expenses during the pandemic so that they wouldn't have to lay off. I focused on one company that hadn't been reported because we all know about Ruth Chris and the LA Lakers and other companies and corporations and businesses that got it. But I focused on a company that hadn't been reported that got the money and they weren't struggling. In fact, it was thriving and hiring, the exact opposite of what the program was intended for. So I used the EDGAR database to help in my reporting on this, and I found it was really an interesting company that I called the woman who was the acting CEO. I called her on a Sunday, right? Because you tend to get people on a Sunday afternoon, and I kind of caught her off guard, so she gave me some really good tape and some really good quotes. But if you're looking into nonprofits and you want to see the money coming in and going out, I think I skipped a page, but I'll go back. But that company, let me go back to the Paycheck Protection Program. That company got, it was almost $3 million. And once we did the story, they then gave the money back, which a lot of companies did. And plus, they were doing really well. You could check the market and see how their stocks are doing, and their stocks had like tripled over a period of time. So they weren't struggling. So they were, they weren't like the LA Lakers, but they also were not a struggling company and are not. So if you're looking into nonprofits and you want to see the money coming in and going out and what it's being spent on, a list of the officers and other details, you can check out guidestar.org, which is really, I think Mark will agree, we all use that all the time. And I've found some good things over the years. And then charitynavigator.org is another good one. So I want to go back to my building the database of companies that got more than $1 million in contracts to produce the PPE. And one of the things I wanted to know was how long the companies had been in business, right? When were they created? If they were newly created, that raised a red flag that I wanted to check them out further, because if that's the case, I could create a company, but can I get a $20 million contract? Doubtful. So I wanted to know more about it. And so to do that, I checked the Secretary of State records, right? Businesses have to register with the Secretary of State in most jurisdictions, except in DC. Here, because we're not a state, new companies register with the Office of Tax and Revenue. And so one of the companies I looked at was Filicate LLC. Before anybody else. It's just NPR was a little slower getting it on air. It received a contract with FEMA, and anybody who's covered disasters knows FEMA is probably the first agency you should look at in terms of spending and possibly wasteful spending. And so it received a contract to provide COVID-19 test supplies and kits. I did the basic research and found that it was based in Florida. I ran the company through the Florida Secretary of State's website. And is anybody here live in Florida, work in Florida? So if you do, you know how amazing the public records laws are in Florida. It operates under the Sunshine Law, and that lots of things that might not be public in some places are public there and easy to find. The Secretary of State's website there also lets you run judgments and liens and fictitious names. And so I found that Filicate started as a company on May 1st. 7 days later, it landed a $10.2 million contract with FEMA. It was one of 3 companies that my colleagues and I found that had been created just before getting government contracts to produce PPE, which means the companies had no experience with PPE and had never worked in the medical field at all. So you know how journalism is sometimes about luck. Actually, a lot of times it's about luck. Well, I got lucky with this company. Florida Business Records listed one person, this female lawyer who, and I found she had gone to graduate from the university. She was a Gator, University of Florida. She was divorced. I always check divorce records. She was divorced, so she had another name. And she was listed as the manager of the company. There was no other name listed with this company except hers. So I checked her out through the state bar to make sure her law license was current, the marriage and divorce records, and found that she used a different name that was listed on company records. Now, not all states make divorce records public, but Florida does. So when I called her, she wasn't available, and her assistant took my name and number. I thought, she's never gonna call me back. So, because I'm thinking like, this is during a pandemic, and I'm thinking, lady, how busy are you as an attorney when everybody's working from home, right? And the courts are basically shut down. But 30 minutes later, I get a call, but it wasn't from this woman. A man named Paul Wexler called me back and said he was the owner. So then I thought, let me run his name and address through the Secretary of State records. And I ran him through the owner and registered agent, right? You can do that. And his name showed up several times with different companies with addresses in Florida and Texas and other places. So then, of course, I ran those companies through court records and found that he was fined $2.7 million in 2013 after the Federal Trade Commission sued him and a debt relief company that he owned in Florida. I can't emphasize how important lawsuits can be. They will list the lawyers for both sides, and journalists know that lawyers can be super helpful. I mean, because they know everything and they have access to things like we don't, like depositions, right? I once did a story where a lawyer gave me the depositions that basically made my investigation, and without it, I wouldn't have had as good a story, or maybe not a story at all. So then I background another company, right? Again, you see the pattern here. There's companies after companies. They got a multi-million-dollar contract. I found a lawsuit, but the case was complicated. I couldn't understand, what is this case about? Is it about fraud? Is it about theft? What is it? And so I wanted to make sure I understood it. So I called the plaintiff's lawyer. Because, you know, if you call the defendant's lawyer, you're going to get a whole different, right? Both of them are biased, but you got to figure out which side to call, or call both, right? And so this lawyer was more than willing to fill in the blanks and tell me where else I might want to search for information on this business and its owners. So while you're checking lawsuits on businesses and the owners, don't forget to look at the other records I mentioned. And there's another site that could give you insight into a business, and it's fec.gov, right? The Federal Election Commission site is where to check to see if companies or individuals have contributed to federal campaigns, and if so, how much and how often. I remember my colleague that I was working with on this had done a story a little before this, and he was checking the FEC site and saw that a man he was looking at had given all this money to the Trump campaign, and he had gotten, I believe he had gotten like a huge contract. It turns out that he then became the ambassador from, I think he was from Illinois. I know y'all are shocked that it has to do with Chicago and Illinois. And so the FEC website can be really, really helpful. There are two other sites that I also like, and one is followthemoney.org. And this site has lots of data, including contributions to candidates in local, state, and federal races, and they have them by candidate and by political party and ballot measure committees and such. It's one of those sites that I can spend hours checking out, which means I probably need to get a life, but I still enjoy checking it out. And the last site is violationtracker.org, which is this amazing thing. And it's terrific at wading through government databases for companies that may be violating medical safety and other regulations.